implantation, or can you kind of generate or simulate some sort of implantation experience? Obviously, I'm getting into the other controversy of the potential development of artificial wombs here. What has been done so far in the space that you know of?
Yes, and so typically the embryo, by day 7 of his or her life, we really, again, naturally, that embryo is already undergoing that process of implantation at that point. It's very interesting. There's this window of implantation that exists in the uterus. It's just so beautifully timed in our bodies. It's such a miracle for any of us to be here, because there's a 24-hour time frame where it's almost like, I think of it like this window opens up in the uterus, and there are these structures called penopodes. They beckon. There's a crosstalk from the embryo coming into the uterine cavity, and the penopodes coming out from, at the endometrium, and then pulling that embryo in, and then that window shuts. And so that's why when we think about progesterone, which is a very important reproductive hormone, the timing of progesterone is critically important because it opens and shuts that window of implantation. Anyway, so that whole process has to occur at a very precise time. When we think about artificial wombs and that burgeoning technology, they might be able to simulate that process by the administration of these hormones in a very precise manner. It's similar to what's done during frozen embryo transfer cycles.
Simulate that process in a live woman, or simulate that process in some artificial womb? As of, I think, even 2017, there were reports that some scientists have been successful in developing a baby sheep in a biobag, as they call it, an artificial womb, and bringing the baby sheep to term. So I know we haven't heard any reports that that's been done successfully on a human, but that leads to a whole other question about what's the morality around artificial wombs?
Well, even artificial wombs, but also, Lila, it's been done already where they're developing embryo-like, that's what they call them, embryos from stem cell derived tissue. So what that means is this is not an embryo created from an egg and a sperm. They're manipulating stem cells, which are what we call totipotent. So they have the potential to become any sort of cell in the body. And what they're doing is that they're creating an embryo specifically from the stem cell. And they allow that embryo to grow to like day 7 or even a little bit longer. And that then opens up a whole Pandora's box. So that embryo
would have, if any, one biological parent, but it's not even clear how the bond of like mother-child, father-child, if the stem cell was from a man or a woman.
Correct. Or even,
unclear.
Again, soul, right? You think about all these different, it's very... it feels very otherworldly, almost like it just shouldn't. It's crazy.
There's cloning in addition.
And cloning as well. So there's a whole host of different technological, things coming down the pipeline. And this is the end of what we're already dipping our toe into now, which is, again, the reason why this isn't just to help the embryos that are created and sitting in storage indefinitely now. This is a call for us to examine what are we doing and why are we, it's very scary.
What's the interest in cloning? I mean, I've seen it talked about now. It's been talked about for decades. And there have been animals that have been cloned, like Dolly the sheep. And there have been, even among very pro-abortion, super pro-IVF scientists, there's, in the West anyways, there seems to be some reticence to go whole hog on cloning. I've seen alternate scientists and labs talking about how they will be experimenting with it. So we don't know what's happening in other countries. What are the ethical issues? Walk us through what cloning is, and then what are the ethical issues with cloning?
Yes, and so again, cloning would be to replicate that person's DNA to replicate that person ultimately would be the ultimate fruition of that. Similar to Dolly the sheep, okay?
And when you say replicate the person, make a genetically identical person.
Correct.
But that is that the same as a genetically identical?
Is the issue. This is, again, the hubris of man, because we think that we can do that. There are so many levels by which we develop, be it from, again, our chromosomes then form different proteins. There are what we call epigenetics. So that is certain factors that silence or turn on and off our genes from being expressed. Then there are cellular factors, and you kind of go from micro to macro level, all of the very complex interactions that exist to make us who we are, which is why twins, identical twins, who are chromosomally the same, are not. And so for us to think that we can just very easily, we'll just clone a human being, no problem, and not to understand that by manipulating these things, we might be opening that person up to an increased risk of cancer, for example. There might be so many other downstream effects that we have no clue about that that are present. It's just, it's not good science.
Are there health risks to IVF conceived babies? 93% of the babies that are conceived via IVF end up dying. Could you share more about that study?
They are frozen indefinitely, potentially killed, or they're donated to research.
Effectively, it's going to be human experimentation and they're going to die.
Yes.
It's $60,000 on average to achieve one live birth for IVF. You said earlier it was maybe $3,000 to $5,000 about how to do the restorative medicine approach. What are the success rates between restorative medicine versus IVF?
Restorative reproductive medicine data, one study, their average age was 37, had 5 years of infertility. About all of them had had prior IVF cycles. 5% of those women had achieved live birth through IVF in the past. What he was able to do using neofertility, he was able to achieve about a 32% chance of live birth, which is remarkable.
As good as IVF, or even better, because these are the ones that IVF didn't even work for them.
Right.
That's incredible. Clip from President Trump talking about how he wants to make IVF free for everyone.
I'm announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women, IVF treatment. Because we want more babies, to put it very nicely.
Naive liberal types really lack imagination for evil. And that's a big problem, because one of the things that's a consequence of that, for example, is like there's a proclivity for naively compassionate people to view even violent criminals as victims. And the reason for that is, imagine that you're trying to understand the motive for a violent crime. Well, you could understand that there are conditions under which that might be intensely enjoyable as a perpetrator, but you have to go very, very dark places in order to understand that. And so instead of doing that effort, and that is an effort, and it's a moral effort, because it reveals something profoundly disturbing about the nature of the human soul, you might say, the easiest thing to think is, well, nobody could possibly undertake an action like that unless they'd been brutalized and were victims. And so then you fall into the pathology of feeling sorry for the truly sadistic psychopaths, and that's a really bad strategy.
When we talk about witches as feminists, we talk about returning to that power, a power that may have been vilified and forgotten but has stayed within us all along, desperate to get out, to challenge the status quo, and to change the world. A power it's time for us all to step into in whatever way calls to us for ourselves, for the ancestors they tried to burn, and for all those who still experience torture and terror daily simply because they identify as women.